Currently, McLaren has got the fastest car in Formula 1, and the two drivers for McLaren in Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris have got more wins this season than any other team and driver combo on the grid. In fact, if Oscar was to win the Canadian Grand Prix next weekend, he'll have equalled Charles Leclerc's win tally in 6 fewer seasons. But that argument of, it's the car, that people love to scream on social media because their driver isn't winning and somebody else is, isn't a new argument. It was being said on the Autosport forums as far back as 25 years ago, when it was a certain German in a certain red Italian rocket ship that was racking up the wins. The when it's my driver it's talent, when it's somebody else it's the car thing has been going on forever. And I guarantee the same would have been said about Jim Clark in 1965. He lucked into a god-tier Lotus in Formula 1 and the Indy 500 in the same year. But he actually is the greatest of all time. British bias, innit, bruv? In the 60s, it was Jimmy and Lotus. When the Lotus wasn't breaking down, obviously. But then it was Lauda in his Ferrari. Then you had Senna and Prost in that overpowered McLaren. Mansell winning because of the computer driving the car for him. Then you had Schumacher, and then Alonso because the FIA nerfed the Ferraris. Jensen won because of his illegal diffuser, and then you had the Red Bull years, which started in 2010. Red Bull had entered the newer era of V8 racing pretty competitively. They hadn't been able to win in 2009 because of the fairy tale early part of the season that Jensen and Brawn had enjoyed, but in the latter part, they became increasingly more competitive, with Sebastian Vettel taking the team's first ever win at the Chinese Grand Prix, which was the third round of the season back then, and it prevented Button taking an opening hat-trick of wins. Vettel wouldn't win again until Silverstone, with Webber getting his first win at Hockenheim. But Red Bull showed that they'd be a force to be reckoned with into the next decade, as they won the final 3 races of the season. Vettel in Japan, Webber in Brazil, and Vettel again at Abu Dhabi. And just as a random bit of pub trivia, Sebastian Vettel won Toro Rosso's first Grand Prix, which was Monza 2008, and then won Red Bull's first Grand Prix, China 2009, in consecutive years. I don't think there's been any other driver that's been able to do that. Win one team's first Grand Prix, that's, first Grand Prix win, not first ever Grand Prix ever, and then go to another team in the next year and do the same thing again, and do that in consecutive years, if you can follow my reasoning here. So you don't get this kind of stuff from Josh Ravel and Peter Brook, do you? Red Bull were now established front-runners, as predicted, but there was still stiff competition because McLaren had made strides forward, as had Ferrari, who now had Fernando Alonso joining them because Kimi Räikkönen had gone to do some rallying for a bit. Alonso had won the opening race in Bahrain after Vettel had started on pole, while Button had won in Australia for the second year in a row to take his first win for McLaren, a race where Vettel had been on pole again. Vettel finally won his first race of the season at Malaysia, while Jensen became the first repeat winner in China. When the teams returned to Europe, Webber took the wins in Spain and also at Monaco to take the lead of the championship. And a lot of people were saying at the time, oh wow, Webber could actually be in contention for the title. He's driving brilliantly. In the same way that we're talking about Oscar Piastri doing the same thing now. And for all those people that seem to think that the British are quite upset because Oscar is beating Lando in what is supposed to be the Lando Norris era, we actually don't care. We like Oscar. We think he's funny. We like the way that he just turns up, races, wins, goes home again, and he's just, well, I've been calling him Stone Cold Steve Osktin all year. And this bit also goes out to the Australians that got quite upset that I barely mentioned Oscar in the Spanish Grand Prix review on Monday. I might have mentioned him if Verstappen wasn't hogging all the spotlight. Anyway, Webber had taken a surprise lead in the standings, albeit equal on points with Vettel, but led the championship because he'd won 2 races to Vettel's 1. But it was close between the top 4 as a whole, with Webber, Vettel and Alonso separated by 3 points, and Button was on 70 points and still well in it. Remember as well that this was the first season of the 25 points for a win point structure, and with retirement still a very real possibility for the top running cars, things could change in an instant. In the constructors though, Red Bull had a somewhat healthy lead of 20 points from Ferrari, with McLaren still in contention. There was then a massive gap down to the new Mercedes team in 4th, while Renault seemed to be doing alright in 5th, their 2010 car being much better than the 2009 car was. But we looked at them in the previous video this week. That spider diagram is getting bigger still. But after the Monaco Grand Prix would be a quick visit to Istanbul in Turkey and then onwards to the Canadian Grand Prix before going back to Europe. Yes, it seems weird that they do a flyaway bit in what is supposed to be the European season, but it's all because of climate. Canada is in June because of the climate in Montreal. If they did it in sort of March, April with Miami, it could still snow in Montreal. It's also why the British Grand Prix is in July and not in April or September or any month that isn't July, because it rains a lot here. The Turkish Grand Prix was a popular one. I know a fair few people who always enjoyed it on the racing sims and enjoyed watching the cars go flying through that epic Turn 8 section. It was also an anti-clockwise track, which meant it was a challenge for the drivers, and it was different for the teams as well. It was a really cool layout that had a decent flow. It also had some high-speed sections and a lot of elevation change, particularly through that Turn 3, 4 and 5 section. Turn 8 was also downhill, which would have put an immense strain on the front right tyre. The challenge for the teams was really in the setup. Put the downforce on the car and you'd have the grip through Turn 8, but you'll bleed time through the fast section towards the end of the lap. Take it off to maximise top speed in that final section and you burn the tyres in Turn 8. And if you need a reminder of how the lap looked, I'm happy to oblige. Despite Webber and Red Bull's dominance in Spain and Monaco, Marc was still being a bit wary of his chances, making the bold and seemingly correct prediction that the championship wasn't going to be between two people come the end of the season. And Webber's cautiousness was also rooted in history, because Ferrari had won 3 of the last 5 races at the circuit, the only 2 exceptions being that Button had won the previous year in 2009 and Raikkonen had won the inaugural race for McLaren in 2005. McLaren also had the lap record for the circuit, with Juan Pablo Montoya setting a still yet to be beaten 124.7. Montoya was an absolute monster and doesn't get a lot of credit, unfortunately. I've done a video on him already. But Ferrari were a little more upbeat than they had been in the previous 2 rounds. Alonso had been struggling because the 2010 Ferrari didn't perform well at high downforce circuits, and the characteristics of Istanbul Park lent themselves towards the strengths of the F10 rather than the weaknesses. But at the same time, Alonso said he would be incredibly surprised if the Red Bulls finished behind him for whatever reason. McLaren, meanwhile, who had the innovative F-duct which improved top speed in a straight line, felt that this would be a strong race for them and they might be able to bag a win. But because Webber had led every single lap of the Spanish and Monaco Grand Prix, Red Bull was still the favourites. Red Bull had brought a new rear wing for the race, but its arrival to the circuit was quite late, and they'd also decided not to use their own version of the F-duct. Seeing as they only had one rear wing available, they slapped it on Vettel's car for the final practice session and he got to go out for the whole session with it. Webber wouldn't get to use it until qualifying, where he'd have way less time with it. But with this new wing, Webber stuck his car on pole for the 3rd race in a row. Vettel meanwhile was in 3rd, with Hamilton sandwiched in between them, about a 10.5-ish off the Strahan. Webber had beaten Vettel by half a second, a new rear wing or not, that's a massive amount of time to dunk on someone, after Vettel was fastest in the first 2 parts of the overall session. Jensen was 4th, the Michael was 5th, Rosberg 6th, and then the final 3 positions in the top 10 were filled by Kubica, Massa and Petrov. And Kobayashi did pretty well for Sauber. I need to do a video on him at some point. And I need to do a larger video on Webber's career as well, because we only really remember the Red Bull years and where it all disintegrated for him. He was doing some pretty amazing things in Jags in the early part of the 2000s. And in that video, I'll reiterate a tweet that I put up the other day about how Webber is the perfect manager for Oscar Piastri. Because if there was something to experience in an F1 career, Webber experienced it. As it was, Webber held on to his first place into turn 1, but the hashtag of Blessed was shadowing him for the full lap and was able to use Webber's toe to save a tiny bit of fuel so he could push towards the end. Schumacher had initially got in front of Button and was holding him up, but Jensen in his faster McLaren was able to get by on the back straight. Apparently, Hamilton got a lot of wheel spin and didn't bother using the second stage of the clutch that they had at the time. But isn't that what that second stage is for? Although I suppose if you're getting a ton of wheel spin, it doesn't matter what you do with that paddle, it's not going to do anything. I thought I'd quickly show you how they used to do the clutches back then. What they do is they sit on the grid with both paddles pulled in. When the lights went out, they would dump the right hand paddle and the car would start moving forward on the bite point. And then they would feed in the secondary paddle on the left hand side to mitigate the wheel spin and get the best starts possible, while dialing in the clutch exactly how they'd want it, which they can't do anymore when they went over to fixed bite points. Now they just have one paddle because of the FIA. So with that explanation out the way, Webber, Hamilton, Vettel and Button were clear of the rest of the field and were opening gaps. Hamilton was faster than Webber in the opening stint, but Webber was doing just enough to stay ahead. And the pushing to overtake him wasn't helping McLaren, because after about 10 laps or so, they found that Hamilton and Button were consuming more fuel than they thought, so they told both drivers to turn the wick down. Vettel pitted on lap 15, while Button pushed hard to try and get the overcut on him. And I think at some point I really do need to do a video on pit strategies, because that's probably my weakest point when it comes to talking about all this stuff. But I've been saying that for a while, but I'll get there. Eventually. The McLarens were losing time to Red Bull in turn 8 because of dirty air and superior Red Bull downforce, but the F-duct was bringing them back into contention in a straight line. The problem was, the gains from the F-duct didn't give them enough, it just restored the time lost. Button took too much out of his tyres, so when he pitted he still emerged in 4th place, behind Vettel. Hamilton pitted from 2nd, but he rejoined in 3rd because McLaren had trouble getting one of the tyres on. So the order was now Webber, Vettel, Hamilton and Button, with the 4 of them still running quite close. It was then 15 seconds from Button back to the 2 Mercs, with Schumacher leading Rosberg and then Kubica. Massa was in 8th but being chased by Petrov, while Alonso was up to 10th, having started a disappointing 12th. Then the reports started coming in that it might rain. But Red Bull then had a predicament of their own. Webber was told to slow down, but if he did, the McLarens would have caught and passed him. Vettel, meanwhile, had managed to save a bit of extra fuel in the opening stages thanks to the toe of Lewis, so he had an extra kilogram or so to play with. And Seb being Seb at this time, he'd engaged Renault's highest engine mode to close up. Webber had turned his engine down on lap 39, while Vettel had turned his dial the other way, and it seemed he wanted the win. Webber had actually asked what Vettel's fuel status was when he was told to slow down, so Mark was saving, but Seb was able to push a little bit harder, and Vettel had that little bit extra in his back pocket to catch up and potentially overtake Webber. On lap 40, Vettel was noticeably faster. He got through turn 8 better than Webber did and got a much better exit on the exit of the turn 9-10 chicane. With him being so close to the sister Red Bull, he could probably read the part number on the rear wing as they came through 11, more commonly known as Faux Rouge. Webber held to the left-hand side, but left enough room as Vettel was trying to get by on that far left-hand side of the track, which would have then compromised him into turn 12. But as Vettel was around halfway clear of Webber, he drifted to the right, and the two made contact. Vettel clanged into Webber's car, puncturing the right rear tyre and spinning Vettel through 720 degrees, with Seb reaching his hands out of the cockpit as if to go, "What the hell, man?" Webber also went off the road in the chaos, and it's lucky that Vettel's car didn't make secondary contact with Webber and take both of them out for good measure. Vettel was irate over the radio, dropping several F-bombs and saying he was going home. Webber dropped down to 3rd behind Hamilton and Button because of the contact, and then had to pit for a new nose and some new tyres as a precaution. Hamilton and Button started fighting for the lead themselves and almost had their own collision, but McLaren told the drivers to hold station and Hamilton won the race with Button 2nd and Webber in third. After the race, Webber was sent to the press conference, while Helmut Marko was outside blaming Mark for the collision. While Christian Horner had initially been on the fence about it all, the longer time went on, he too started to blame Webber, and Mark was now feeling like the odd one out in this whole situation. When he saw that Seb was being hugged and consoled by the team, he started to put two and two together, and began to feel, oh, so that's how it is it? It got worse because Vettel was excused from the post-race debrief, and wouldn't then be able to talk about what happened, making it even harder for Webber to say his piece about how he thought the incident transpired, because there was nobody to argue the case to. He then sat down and wrote a letter to Dietrich Mateschitz, saying that he thought it was wrong that team management and certain individuals had already decided to tell the media that it was Mark's fault, without working the whole thing out internally first. Mateschitz took the letter well, agreeing with Webber on how it should have been handled, but that only pissed off Horner further because he thought that Webber had gone behind his back. But from Webber's point of view, he didn't need anything else, because he now knew who was number one in that team and who was pulling the strings. The old Australian dog winning the championship before the pet project wasn't going to be a good look for them. It's similar to that conspiracy theory that Michael Schumacher deliberately threw the 1999 Japanese Grand Prix when he'd been fast all weekend, because Eddie Irvine shouldn't be allowed to win a championship in a Ferrari before Michael, who was the number one driver. But all of that was just the start. Just 2 races later we saw the, yep, not bad for a number 2 driver quip, and over the next 3 years we'd see that Red Bull really did have its stock invested entirely within Vettel. The final fallout was at Malaysia in 2013, with the infamous Multi-21 incident where the two were told to hold station but Vettel disobeyed that order, and in Webber's own words after, was offered protection as usual. Webber's 2010 also wasn't helped by his crash at Valencia, where he looped over the back of Kovalainen's Lotus. Nothing beats a Jet 2 holiday. And as Autosport wrote in 2020, covering the 10th anniversary of the incident, it meant that Mark wasn't able to join Alan Jones and Jack Brabham as Aussie World Champions, falling 10 points short of Vettel come the end, and ended up being overtaken by Alonso, who finished just 2 points behind Vettel at the end. Have I done Alonso's near misses? Yes, I have, but not the full seasons. I'll have to have a look into it and see if it's worth doing full seasons over individual races for those 2 time periods. But now, in 2025, Australia has a new hope. Oscar Piastri, Mark Webber's client and protege. Now currently, Oscar is in a team that has 2 drivers going for the title. Webber's been there. There's the allegations that Zach Brown cares more about Lando than Oscar. Webber's seen and done that too. There's another driver on the grid who's unnecessarily aggressive at times. And guess what? Webber's seen that as well. It's why I say that Webber is the perfect manager for him. Everything that Oscar is going to go through this year, Webber's been there and done that, and will be able to offer first-hand advice. Now admittedly, there is a very low chance that Oscar and Lando will come to blows like Mark and Seb did in this particular race. But what you can count on is that all the advice that Webber will be able to pass on to Oscar as he bids for the 2025 championship will have all been learned as a result of this one race. So then, a look at the time Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel collided at Turkey in 2010, which started the breakdown in the relationship between Webber and Red Bull as they started putting all their attention on their young driver. If this has been an interesting look through the motorsport history books, then do give the video a like so I know a good job was done, and for more stuff from this channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads over at Patreon who continue to support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help out with the picture purchasing piggy bank or help cover the other expenses that I have, a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Or there's super thanks for one and done donations and memberships if you want to do Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.